I'm so ashamed. Let's do some EFMism here.
Let's get this podcastism started.
Oh, did you say entrepreneurism or is it
Entrepreneurism?
We're going to start with the word of the week.
I'm so ashamed.
Just found a chink in your armor. This is like, we're okay with this. We're okay. Explain what's going on here, Chris.
Oh, the guys called me out on something. Chris Niemeyer said, "Hey, Chris, I got a word of the week question for you," and he nailed me. I was saying a word that isn't really a word. Entrepreneurism, apparently, is not a word. Entrepreneurialism, that IAL in there makes it a word, or entrepreneurship, but not entrepreneurism.
And I was very genuinely wondering the difference. And entrepreneurialism is just too many syllables.
So we're going to go with entrepreneurship now. We're going to dump my made-up word.
I'm pretty sure you can put ism after anything, and it just kind of pulls it all together. Makes it work.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Entrepreneurism podcast.
Entrepreneurism, family man.
The EFM podcast. We are just four guys who are crazy about our lives. We love our kids, and we want to kill it in entrepreneurship.
Entrepreneurism, yeah. And our child raisingism is a part of the mix as well, right?
Oh boy, this is going to be a giggly episode. I can already tell.
Giggly. The horse is dead.
Giggleisms.
But today we wanted to address this idea of entrepreneurship and why we teach our kids entrepreneurship. And the two reasons behind this, why the four of us are entrepreneurs, why we get to live this life, the risk, the reward that we get to reap, and the time we get to spend talking with our kids about this important and different, odd, radical way of doing life. So, guys, I'm excited about this topic. We've had a lot of time to talk about just the importance of why we're living this life.
I love that we're having this conversation because I don't think a lot of people think about this very often. When you think about why teach your kids to be entrepreneurs, why do that? The answer might be, so they could be an entrepreneur like me, or so they can have better opportunities. But you and I and everyone else on the screen knows there's a whole lot more to it than that.
There is, and I think this is very cool that we're having this conversation because anytime we talk about entrepreneurship, we're talking about something that less than 10% of the population even do. Less than 10% of all the people in the workforce are doing anything entrepreneurial. Of those, let's say it's 9% who are doing something entrepreneurial. How many of them have thought it through philosophically, like their view of life and parenting and how we shape the next generation enough to where they could have an intelligent conversation about the why. The why for many, I think, just as well, I had to make some money and I was out of work, so I started a side gig and it took off and I'm thrilled. Well, that's great, but it wasn't thought through. It wasn't an intellectual thing. It was a reactive, practical thing. Very honorable, but we're saying, yeah, we not only are entrepreneurs, we are wanting to teach and shape and form in our kids an entrepreneurial mindset to carry on a family tendency toward entrepreneurship. That's quite a different thing. That requires a lot more thought and intentionality.
Chris, I totally agree with that. I mean, this is a radical way of doing things. It's like you said, it's a 1 in 10, if that, opportunity to live a different life and to show our kids a different way of being, a different way of doing life. And I love that we each have the basis of a career. We've had that job, if you will. We know what that's like. We know the juxtaposition of what that means for our time freedom, for our creativity, for the way that we get to do life. And so how do we bring maybe that experience into now we're entrepreneurs, now we're fathers and stewards of these kids? How does that inform how we approach and the reasons why we want to teach them entrepreneurship?
You can be an entrepreneur and do the same thing as you do as an employee. Build a business in a way where you're not spending the time with your children that's what makes our philosophy at EFM maybe different than probably say even most entrepreneurs, just the model of the way we want to build and design our business and our lifestyles. That philosophy is just huge, that if we know that the reason why we want to do this is for that relationship and the time with our kids, if that's our reason, then it changes everything about the way we do our business.
Isn't that an interesting reason? Relationship to teach entrepreneurship. If we think about our vision for our lives, we really stretch that out and think about our kids and how we want our relationship to be. Man, I know I want to be with my kids. I want them to want to be with me and not have to convince them to come visit me. And a lot of that connection and a lot of that relationship building happens when we're doing stuff together. Mm-hmm. And if we're not doing stuff together, then it's really tough to build the relationship. And man, when you're building a business, doing something entrepreneurial, what a great opportunity to do something together and build that relationship.
When we're talking here on EFM about entrepreneurship, we're actually talking mostly about home-based entrepreneurship. And that is a distinct subcategory of entrepreneurism in general. Because I think back to the years that I had already moved out of the workforce as somebody else's employee. I set up and ran my own very successful counseling practice. So I was an entrepreneur. But it wasn't at my home. I didn't have counseling clients coming to my house. Of course, I worked at an office that I leased, out in the main section of town. And so I still followed a lot of the same lifestyle patterns that I did back when I was somebody else's employee. I left in the morning as the kids were getting up bleary-eyed and waving bye-bye at the window. And I came home and dinner was still, hopefully hot on the table at 5:30 or 6 o'clock at night. And I was in there sometimes on the weekends and all. But for all intents and purposes, my time and relationship with my kids didn't look much different when I was an entrepreneur out of the home than it did when I was an employee out of the home. It's only when we can do something that allows us to come home and work from home that we can have the conversation that I think we're wanting to explore today.
McCluskey, I'm just thinking, I've actually had mentors and Christian entrepreneurs that I highly respect that have grown big businesses tell me I could never do what you guys are doing with the home office and the home school and all this home stuff. And I have to remind myself of that why all the time, because it's a messy thing to do the way we're doing. But when we remind ourselves this is why we're doing and what it's going to produce, then it just makes a lot of sense and creates a lot of clarity. That's one of the reasons why I love being a part of this podcast and hanging out with you guys every week, because if I'm doing this alone, sometimes it just doesn't make sense, because it's a different sort of business being a home-based entrepreneur doing the homeschool and building a business with our kids around, knocking at our doors, than it is us scaling some business and getting to leave our family and go and be out there in the marketplace and just focus on the business. And I can smile when I think of that why. And that relationship and that time with the kids to me is everything, because we'll never get it back ever if we don't embrace that now when the kids are under our roofs, as Niemeyer says.
Yeah. Well, I've got to step back and just say I love what you shared just there about the home-based part. And we'll get to this point you just mentioned, Chris, but this home-based part allows us to spend that time. It is that first point of the why we're doing this is the time and the relationship. And so, yeah, just yesterday, this is actually part of my goals too for this. From last week's episode, we're talking about how to be intentional this summer, right? And I literally wrote this down in my planner. One of the areas that I wanted to focus on is being super intentional as a family with our time this summer. And so, at 11 o'clock yesterday morning, in between some work stuff, we had a family summer adventure meeting, right? And we're talking about all the ideas and activities and et cetera that they wanted to do. And we had a whiteboard out there. This is a typical 3, right? You guys would probably have like awesome paper and stuff. I had a whiteboard with black marker.
We have sticky notes.
Yeah, you have sticky notes all over the place with like highlighters and fireworks probably inside. But we had this whiteboard. We're just throwing all these ideas out there. And one of the ideas that the kids had, my 3 oldest, 10, 8, and 6-year-olds, are to have these popsicle stands or lemonade stand out in front of our neighborhood, in our driveway throughout the summer. And so we're talking about this, and they've had some experience back in Oregon doing similar ideas, and they wanted to go big because we've visited a couple of these little high-end farmers markets recently where they've got these foo-foo organic popsicles that are like $4 or $5 each. And so like, we want to do a big popsicle stand with organic blueberries and strawberries and all this stuff. And it was great to spend that time to talk through it. And in this case, kind of talk them down a little bit on the realities of what that could look like, the cost, how much they'd actually have to charge for this. Would the car driving by even want to stop for a $4 or $5 popsicle? But just so much fun to this point, this reason of spending time being in relationship with our kids at a young age. And we had this talk because, Chris, then it moves forward 10 years down the road. And here you are with Drew working on a much bigger topic of real estate together.
Yeah, it was pretty cool day when he went with me on Friday and we closed on a property. And it's a property that I was buying anyway for a different reason, because of the need of access to the property and the parking that it provided and all. But he looked at the piece, it's a quadplex, and he's like, Dad, I know you're talking about demolishing that, but I think if I were to put in the sweat labor to it, I could actually turn that quadplex around and make some serious money off of it. Could I buy it off of you? And so we've had many conversations that are just the older version of, Dad, could we do an organic popsicle stand at the end of the driveway? I mean, it's really just, like you said, fast forward 10 years. And we're with our kids in the realities of life at home as a home-based entrepreneur and talking with them about the things they would dream of doing and saying, well, okay, son, then let's look at it, crunch the numbers on it. How do you think you could turn it around? And today in the mail, he got his respirators that he ordered, one for him and one for his buddy from Amazon, bodysuit and respirators to go in there and start tearing out walls and stuff. He's got some mold issues, but going to clean the place up. And he's off to the races. He's doing his older version of getting the little popsicle stand together because I'm available. I've always been available to him for these 21 years. I've worked from home. And as the kids have ideas, they float them by me, whether we whiteboard them or not. And we run the numbers on them. And many of them, we just say, cool idea. Some they go and do research and start getting books and whatever and fleshing out a little more. And some we say, let's do it. And we experiment and learn all along the way. Can't do that when you're not even there.
Yeah, if you were a truck driver for the last 30 years, you never would be having that conversation.
Nope.
And I could totally see you being a truck driver. You'd be great.
I'm not going to touch that one.
I don't even know what that means.
The fact is that we're returning to a model of parenting, especially fathers, that the world has lived on for almost all of known history. Until the last 100 or so years, dads almost always worked at home. And that meant that their kids learned the trade, if it was blacksmithing or whatever it was, or they were out in the fields with the dad. They were with mom. They would go to school. School was only half a day, a few hours. But they did the chores and everything else as a family. Family was together until about the last 120 years or so.
Chris, I love that because that really is the literal lemonade stand going into then a real estate deal 10 years down the road with your kid. But again, you and I, in those examples, were there, were present, were in relationship. And I know with your example with Drew, it didn't just start on the real estate deal. You have been doing this for decades with each of your kids. But that is the first reason, the why we teach entrepreneurship. We want to spend time. We want to be in a relationship. And that leads us to this second reason, which is the legacy, the dynasty that we're building. Your point earlier, this is a 1 in 10, if that, in the U.S. that gets to be part of this adventure of entrepreneurship and to explore that with our kids, to change the family tree. That's a big, big concept that we get to steward in their lives. Jamie, what does that look like for you coming from the background of being a teacher, making that leap to entrepreneurship? How do you adjust that point of legacy?
Just puts a smile on my face thinking about that reason that if we if we do the hard work and invest in our family, invest in our kids, then it's going to change generations to come. I can already see it changing just because of the time that me and Ruthie spend with the kids. The same thing that you guys are doing here. We're planting all those seeds, and we can smile and have faith that God is going to use those tons and tons of small little deposits that we do, lunches on Tuesday afternoon or fishing trips, all the things that we talk about here on the podcast that we are trying to do with our kids, is that we can know that it's going to lead to a different legacy, that in 100 years from now, we'll all be gone, and our families could be different from this point on after we decided to walk away from JOBs, and we get to make these deposits into those relationships. After we're dead, things are going to be different. And I hope we don't die anytime soon. But meanwhile,
after we're dead, things are going to be different. Hashtag Jamie Slingerland.
That's the tweet of the week.
Tweet of the week.
Wow. No, that's true though. These deposits are key. When I look at my 4.5-year-old son, Gunnar, I can already see that he's going to be a leader. He has it in him. When he walks out of the front door of our house, he's influencing people at his age right now. And I want to equip him so he can use that God-given gift and prepare him to become a leader and an influencer when he becomes an adult and even before then. And if I let him go the flow of society right now and end up in some kind of pigeonholed direction that's a 9-to-5 job or something that doesn't allow him to really grow into those gifts, man, I feel like everything that he could be and everything that he could create in his life would just be sabotaged. So that's a big reason for me. I'm thinking like, I want my kids to be leaders, to be influencers, to change the course of culture. And I want to prepare them for that. That's what I want my name to be about.
That's good, Michael. That's really good. I like that you already see that ability of leadership in Gunnar. And I think we each see that. In fact, we've talked about that with some of our oldest kids, especially our firstborn sons. They're kind of naturally bent to be leaders. Jesse is the same way for me. I mean, he is a leader. And having those discussions even now about the types of not just jobs he wants to have, but the types of businesses he wants to run. He is, Michael, he would be having a blast job shadowing you right now because he's just that like engineer, put things together, like build stuff kind of personality. And so he's already talking about when I have a construction company someday, right?
Awesome.
And so he feeds on that. And Alicia and I get to foster that by being home and saying, what do you want to create? How do you want to get there? How do you want to solve those interesting problems? And he will then get to influence his own culture around him. And, Chris, I think about you and your kids now and how you're working at this together in an even bigger way in your community with this incubator you talk about. What's that transition been like from kids in elementary school to then as they get older, now buying a building together, working on like a massive project to encourage entrepreneurship in your community?
Chris, I think you hit on the word there when you were talking about leadership. Our firstborn are emerging as natural leaders. From the psychological perspective, there is no personality type that does not have leadership capability. When we say leaders, we normally think of a hard-driving, type A, a D or an I on the disc profile, but a type A driven type person. That's one style of leadership. Every single child that we have can learn to lead. How? By becoming more and more comfortable and confident in who they are. How does that happen? Generally, it's caught, not taught, like we so often talk about. It's caught, not taught, because they're in relationship with their parents who are lovingly listening to hear how are they hardwired, how are they put together, and then calling them out to experiment with that. They gain confidence as they see that they can try things that they've dreamt up, and they succeed. Sometimes they don't, but you can modify them and make them succeed a different way. That growth into who they are eventually manifests in a unique form of leading simply because they're different than the vast majority of their peers. They're confident, not cocky. They're confident, and they move out, and surprise, surprise, other people begin to follow. That's the making of a leader. So our incubator here, this building that we have, that's a small business incubator for the 20-somethings in our area. It is purely an outgrowth of each of our kids with their unique personalities, having grown up in an entrepreneurial home where dad and mom were there and available to call out their uniqueness, encourage them to experiment with it early on, make their mistakes, have their successes, sock away some money. That $10,000 or so that Drew's got that he's investing in this real estate is purely the outgrowth of his graphic design work that he's done since he was 13. That was all fostered just by experimentation. He didn't start out as a good graphic designer, but we were there alongside of him, calling that forth, and he would make some money and he would sock it away. And now he's at a different season. Then he's launching into real estate. But the whole incubator, all the different businesses that they and their peers will launch from that is just an outgrowth of that. Hey, I get how I'm made. I kind of like how I'm made. The way I'm made manifests as these kinds of things in the world, whether they're services or products or brokering or teaching or all kinds of different things that can be monetized. Those kids become leaders. That's back to Jamie's word, legacy. That's the kind of legacy that we're leaving behind. They're leaders. They shape culture. We leave behind a dynasty kind of a thing that has taken culture in a different way. Why? Largely because we were there. We invested in relational connection with our kids throughout all of their formative years.
I love that, Chris. That is, you said two things there I want to hit on. Attentive. You and Rachel were attentive to how they were bent, what type of leadership they were going to exhibit in their personality types. And then you called it out. You helped foster that. You helped bring that to life to encourage them. And there's that idea of kind of borrowed confidence or borrowed courage they're getting from their parents to say, okay, I could do this. I could help shape my friends around me, my culture. And that's what they're going to do. And that's what you're seeing. And again, to this second point, that is the why, is building a legacy. Why we're teaching our kids this entrepreneurship is building a legacy and a dynasty in our family, in our community, and ideally in our culture for generations to come. So what about you? Teaching your kids entrepreneurship. What are the reasons? What could you do to change areas where you need to grow in being a little more present, being a little more relational, even at the early stages, when they're starting to get quarters around the house or want to take on a lemonade stand? How could you be present to help foster that and then build that legacy? As Chris shared earlier, being attentive to how they're put together, how they're wired, and then foster and fan that flame. Those are the two reasons why we teach entrepreneurship to our kids. We encourage you to do the same. So what about you?